Chapter 15. No one knew exactly when the hostel would be habitable again. After the broken glass had been cleared from the front room, the residents were called back to the house for a brief meeting. They were told to sit in the living room. Gunter, Erin, and Johnny pushed the piano away from the cold air blowing through broken windows. Mrs. Cohen addressed the disheartened assembly. "Quiet, please, for just a moment." When the noise died down, she continued, "Mrs. Glazer and I have spent today contacting our neighbors and asking them if they could host you until our home is livable again. We have done our best to find you all homes as close to Willesden Lane as possible. Unfortunately, some of you will be placed outside of London temporarily." A murmur of disquiet went through the group. "Please be patient and bear with me." The matron looked genuinely distraught. "I know how important it is to all of you to remain in contact with each other. We've become a family. So you have my promise that I will do everything in my power to get our hostel repaired as soon as possible. Please wait until your name is called." Lisa sat still for the next hour and watched her housemates and friends leave one by one. First Gina, then Gunter, then Erin, her spirits sinking lower and lower as her friends left. "Lisa Jura," Mrs. Cohen said finally, and the Quaker lady in black stepped into the foyer. Lisa looked up at her, surprised. This woman had done so much for her already. "Hello, dear Lisa," said Mrs. Canfield. "Will thou forgive me for being so late? I wanted to get here early, but I was held up at meeting." She took Lisa's hand and helped her gather her belongings. Together they walked down the lane to Rifle Road. Lisa paused shyly in front of her new home. "Come in, please. Consider this house thine own," said Miss Canfield as Lisa stepped into the foyer. The furnishings were very simple, and there was no piano. "I'm sure it is difficult being separated from your friends, but I will try to make thee a home nonetheless," Mrs. Canfield said kindly, leading her up the stairs to the tiny bedroom. On the bureau was a framed photograph of a thoughtful-looking young man in a military uniform. "That's my son John. He's somewhere in Africa. He would be happy to know his room is being put to good use." "He's very handsome," said Lisa, trying to make conversation. "He's a medic," Mrs. Canfield said, looking at the photo lovingly. "We don't believe in fighting, of course, but he's doing his part to help his country. I'm very proud of him." One night, as Lisa lay in bed during a lull in the bombing, she heard a familiar whistling at her bedroom window. At first she thought she must be dreaming, but there it was again, the unmistakable melody of the Grieg piano concerto. She jumped up and saw Erin on the street below. She rapped on the glass as an answer, then tiptoed through the house and opened the front door. "Erin," she said excitedly. "Hello, Miss Jura. Lovely evening, isn't it? Care for a stroll?" he asked. "I'll get my coat." She ran back and bundled herself up, paying careful attention in the mirror to the twist of her muffler. As they walked down Rifle Road, Erin filled Lisa in on where she was living and how awful it was. His host family was even more strict than Mrs. Cohen. "Never mind all that. I want you to meet me tomorrow for lunch. I have a surprise for you." "I only get 15 minutes for lunch. You know that," she chastised him. "Trafalgar Square at noon," he said commandingly. In a battle of wills, Lisa was usually the winner. "I refuse to come unless you tell me what it is." Erin stopped for a second to prolong the suspense, then relented. "Myra Hess." Lisa jumped for joy, throwing her arms around him. "Mr. Dimble, I'm sorry, but I have to go somewhere at lunch today. I need an extra hour, please." She hated to lie to Mr. Dimble, but that's the way it had to be. "I have to renew my alien registration card," she fibbed, hoping he wouldn't know much about it. "I'll stay late and make up the time." "Does it have to be today? Fridays are much easier," he said. Lisa thought fast. "Tomorrow's my birthday. I have to do it before tomorrow. If it has to be, all right. I'll have someone cover your spot." She ran up to the 3rd floor to find Gina in the lunchroom and asked to keep her secret. Then she flew out the door into the tube station. At Trafalgar Square, she saw Erin leaning on the huge bronze of the lion's ankle. "Ready?" "Ready." She grabbed his hand, running across the street into the imposing National Gallery. A mammoth 9-foot grand piano was at the end of the gallery, and hundreds of chairs were filling up fast with music lovers. She pulled Erin by the hand and found a seat with the best visibility. A diminutive woman with short dark hair entered to a thunderous standing ovation and stood by the piano bench. "This performance is dedicated to the brave men and women who are serving our beloved country, Britain," she announced. A shiver of pure exhilaration went through Lisa as the opening hush fell over the audience and the concert began. The bell-like tone of the Steinway Grand enveloped the large hall and filled Lisa's heart. She allowed her mind to wander to the fantasy that had so often filled her in Vienna, of playing in front of a grand audience herself in a huge concert hall. For an instant it seemed almost real. Lisa sneaked a look at Erin and noticed there were tears in his eyes. She lived 1,000 dreams in the next 40 minutes. Lisa hated when the beautiful notes slipped away and the concert ended. There was so much she wanted to say to Erin, but she was needed back at the factory. She gave him a hurried thank you and ran for the bus. At lunch the next day, she was embarrassed to hear Mrs. McRae and the other workers sing her a verse from Happy Birthday. Gina began to laugh at Lisa's dismay, but stopped when Lisa shot her a warning look. After blowing out the single candle on top of the tiny cupcake, Lisa split the sweet dessert with her as a payoff for her silence. "I have some news," Gina said. "I'm not going to work here anymore." "What do you mean? Why not?" Lisa asked, surprised and alarmed. "The lady where I'm staying wants me to help take care of her new baby." "Oh no, how far away is it?" Lisa asked. 40 minutes by the train. Not so bad, I guess." Lisa felt suddenly abandoned. "I won't just be a servant, though," Gina said to cheer things up. "The lady says I can go to school in the morning. Isn't that wonderful?" "Yes, it is," said Lisa, trying to hide her sadness as the buzz of the lunchroom disappeared into the inner silence of another loss. The whistle of the Grieg again sounded at Lisa's window that evening. Having hoped it would come again soon, she had laid out her shoes, her coat, and a muffler just in case. She tiptoed out the front door, leaving it slightly ajar. She and Erin strolled through streets darkened by the blackout. It was blessedly quiet, though every few minutes a search beam would sweep the sky for enemy aircraft. They strolled slowly toward no destination in particular. Erin was as sweet and gentle as he had been the day before. She couldn't figure out what would make his mood so different from one day to the next. Sometimes he'd be sarcastic and bitter, then gracious and sentimental, as he was now. "Any news of the committee?" Erin asked. "Gina's got a new job as a nanny. I wonder how long that'll last." He laughed. "Oh, did you hear about Paul?" "No, is he all right?" "They picked him up the day after he turned 16. He's on the Isle of Man." "That's terrible," Lisa said. "How could they? It's so stupid. It's so British." "That's mean." "But don't worry," Erin said. "Gunter got a letter from him. He says he's fine and that the food is better than it was at the hostel. He says there are lots of Nazis and spies, but they don't say much or they'll get beaten up. In 6 months they're going to let him enlist in the army." They kept walking and passed the entrance to the tube station at Willesden Green. "Erin, I want to ask you something personal. Please don't be angry," Lisa began. Erin didn't say anything, so Lisa continued. "What were you crying about yesterday at the concert?" She had been reliving this moment for the last 2 days. Erin was silent for a moment. "I was remembering the chamber music at our house," he said finally. "You had chamber music at your house?" she said, surprised. "When I was younger, I used to fight with my mother about having to go downstairs and listen. All I wanted to do was stay in my room and build bridges, like my father did. I had hundreds of metal strips and screws and bolts that my father had made for me." His voice drifted off for a moment. "Sunday nights, though, they made me listen to chamber music in the salon. You would have loved it." "But why were you crying?" she asked gently. "It's what happened when the chamber music stopped. My father was very influential in Mannheim, you see, just like his father and his father's father. He had designed the major new bridge over the Rhine. The members of the Philharmonic came to the house, so did the mayor. I mean, they used to come before they were told not to by the Nazis." Erin disappeared for a while into the memory of his story. "And then?" Lisa asked, prodding gently. "Then nobody came to the house anymore, and they closed my father's office. One Sunday night, he dressed up again in his black tie, opened the front door, and waited for the guests to arrive. My mother was crying as she watched him waiting and waiting. Of course, nobody came." Lisa waited as Erin exhaled a huge sigh. Then he walked out the door. Lisa waited for Erin to go on, but he didn't. "Then what happened?" "They found him floating in the river, near the bridge he had built. Lisa started to cry, and he took her hand. They walked quietly through the streets. At the corner, in the dark under the streetlight, he put his arm around her and kissed her. She felt her heart beginning to give way.